o'clock.
Pledge allegiance to
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Three have signed to speak to the board. Call the will.
Commissioner Andrew? Here. Commissioner Humberson?
Here.
Commissioner Kalani?
Here.
Commissioner McNeil?
Yep.
Commissioner Stoa?
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Does anybody want to speak right now?
Anybody? I said it's been good, or you think it's in trouble?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I didn't hear any no's.
Still.
Okay, now we get to the public comment. There were two signatures up here. Anybody want to speak? Let's hear right now. Okay, we'll continue. The first on the agenda is a discussion from our water quality manager, Suzanne Delarin.
Okay, so what I can present to you today, there's a lot of stuff going on in the water quality department. Now I have 20 minutes. So I just kind of selected two of the highlights of the big things that we have going on, and they're really more focused on the watershed management side of things. The first is an update on our microbial resource tracking project. If you guys recall, a couple years ago we got a grant from the DEQ to do what's called microbial resource tracking, a study in the Clackamas River septic analysis. So we wrapped that up, and I'm going to present those results. And then I'm going to present the results, some of the things that we have in the pipeline as far as algae monitoring and cost analysis, because that's actually kind of a really hot emerging topic. So first of all, microbial resource tracking. A few years ago, CRWP had a consultant, Herrera, do a GIS septic analysis. This is just kind of a refresher. I'm sure I've presented this to you before.
I probably haven't heard it, so that'd be
good.
great.
So what it was they went through a bunch of data and tried to map all the septic systems in the watershed. So where you see color, that is an identified septic system. The colors, green means that it's probably a healthy system. Yellow, doing okay still, but not great. Orange, a little bit worse. Red, potentially failing. This doesn't mean that they are failing. It just means that it's potentially failing. And they determine this based on certain things like size of the septic, age of the septic, plot. And all that stuff. So that all rolled into this GIS analysis, and this is what we got. So what we found was over 1,000 potentially failing septic systems in the watershed. So as you can see, just by looking at it, it is a massive number. And the problem with failing septics is it is almost a direct line, potentially, of pollution to our watershed. And with this come things like pharmaceuticals, hormones, personal care products, and other contaminants of concern, some of which treatment systems are known not to be able to handle very well. So we want to go in and we want to determine if they were actually failing, if this really was an issue. So that was our primary purpose. The second area of interest was to just look at clusters of potentially failing septics so that we could target them for a septic assistance program. So what was going on at the time, the Clackamas River water providers, working with the county and the DEQ in West, were trying to set up a septic loan program. And so this program would give homeowners with potentially failing septic systems rebates and loans to help them fix their problem. And this project was going to help us determine a baseline of pollution in the watershed related to septics potentially, so that we can determine in the future if our septic assistance program is actually working. So we get the data now, we determine there's a hot spot, there's an area that's bad, we run this septic program for a few years, we go back in those target areas, we should be able to see reduction. Now keep in mind that that's called collecting baseline data, determining what's out there right now. That takes a couple years to develop. So this program was run as a pilot to really determine if this technique was feasible in our watershed. So what microbial source tracking is it's an attempt to determine the source of fecal pollution. And there are a number of different ways that you can do this, but what we were doing was focusing on a cultivation-independent method. What that means is, instead of having to grow something like E. coli or coliform bacteria, we were able to go in and look at the DNA. So by looking at DNA signatures of different bacteria, we were able to determine whether it is human or not. And so that's what we were doing. Another thing that we were doing was we were embarking on our first collaboration in Clackamas Community College. So as you know, the Water Quality and Conservation Program is very big on the development of the future of our water treatment engineers, water quality specialists, our operators, our field crew. And so we really are working to help the community college develop its WET program. And so this would give them an opportunity to advance or update their curriculum, and it would give the students hands-on training about molecular biology and field sampling, something that they didn't really get to do often. And starting with a small pilot project, it gave us the ability to determine if something worked and grow it from there. So, through the course of the program, we had 5 CCC WET interns over 2 years. Most of them would stay with the program until they graduated. 1 worked on our sampling plan. We had 4 that worked on field sampling and laboratory analysis. 3 stayed with the project until graduation, and 1 left to run a micro lab at a wastewater facility. And actually, I just ran into her yesterday, and she's doing great. So I have operation up there because these students had very little experience, very little hands-on training, so we were kind of training from the ground up. So one of the things that they needed to do was work with a micropipette. You may have seen them on the news. Anytime they're showing you about viruses or DNA, it's just a little pipette, transfer stuff. Well, you need to have a steady hand. So, and you need to keep them engaged, and you need to keep them having fun. It can't just be all about work. So while we were waiting for incubations and stuff, all the students were required to play operation so that they could work on getting their hands steadier. We really wanted to bolster their confidence. We really wanted to show them, that science could be fun. It didn't just have to be all lab coats and windowless labs. And so that's one of the techniques that we used. So in this study, we focused on 2 targets, primarily. We had some other things that we were looking at developing, but we're not going to discuss those in this presentation. We focused primarily on Enterococcus, which is a coliform bacteria, and we're actually using the EPA's protocol. Focusing on Enterococcus for us was kind of linking up to the test that we do in CRW's lab. So we are certified to do these things called col-alerts and quantitrays. What they are simple techniques to determine presence or absence of coliform bacteria or E. coli, or with a quantitray, the ability to quantify relatively how much coliform bacteria or E. coli you have in the system. So by using a protocol that took one of those coliform bacteria, we were thinking that this would be a great way to see if our data was matching up to our quantitray data. The next one was HF183. HF stands for human fecal. So this was really the human-specific indicator. Okay, this comes from an organism called the Bacteroidetes. It is specific, this particular one, to the human gut, and you shouldn't find it in the environment. There are many types of Bacteroidetes in the world, don't get me wrong, but this particular one was anaerobic bacteria indicative of the human gut. Now what we would do is we would take a sample, and each one was run alongside a quantitray. You may remember that that's a technique that would determine the mean probable number, or the approximate amount of coliform bacteria and E. coli in the system. And we ran those at CRW's lab. So in the field, we had 7 sampling sites, all along the watershed. 4 of them were from the main stem, 3 of them were from creeks. So we just kind of wanted to get a good sampling. We were looking for high density cluster areas. So some of them were just limited with site selection, as in over here looked really great, but we didn't have any access. Then we had a big cliff, so we were doing the best we could with that boat. So we wound up with the Old South Park Waterboard intake here, NCCWC plant here, CRW's intake here, the failing septic right there. Maybe. I don't know what that is. Rock Creek. And then we had a mobile home park right across from this patch here because we were trying to get here, but there was no access.
Bridge.
Yep, right by the Carver Bridge. And then Clear Creek and Deep Creek. So, whole bunch of bar graphs. But these are a compilation of all the results for the enterococci. So just coliform bacteria. Now, we use that bacteria as an indicator of potential fecal contamination in our system. Okay, so when we go out and we take a collar sample a few times a month out in our distribution system at many sites, one of the things we're looking for is coliform bacteria. And so, enterococci, we were thinking, should relate to those Punisher results. So these blue dots were all the coliform bacteria hits that we had. These black dots, these much lower ones, were E. coli. One of the things I can't explain is why in July 2014 we didn't get any hits. This was consistent for the other primer set as well, but our control samples all ran clean. So there's a little bit of an environmental mystery for us to poke apart, but I think in the future we can get at that. So the main thing out of this was that what we found with the total coliform and the E. coli mean probable numbers they weren't great, they weren't perfect, but they were loosely correlated. So we were pretty happy with that. But the problem was that we thought that this would all line up and be a pretty picture because if we're using coliform bacteria as an indicator of potential fecal pollution, it should map up to just about all fecal pollution, right? So human-specific fecal pollution would be the one that we would be concerned about the most because it would carry the most diseases, or it would be an indication of some other source of contamination like a septic. The problem was we didn't find a correlation between total coliform and E. coli mean probable number. And this isn't uncommon. There are many papers out there that suggest that looking at coliform bacteria and E. coli is not the best way for drinking water systems or anyone to really determine whether or not there is a fecal pollution issue going on, because they can persist in the environment for a long time, they can come from many places. So this just supported this. So we saw no correlation there. And we were kind of a little bummed about that, actually. Would have been a perfect story. But one of the things that you will notice is, so we sampled for a full year, once a month. And so April here, going through March 2015 here, and you'll start to notice that while we don't find it in every sample all the time, once the wet season comes, we start to see increases. So that we found really interesting. So when you break it apart into river sites versus creek sites, this gets a bit more manageable to look at. It was a little exhausting looking at those big bar graphs. But what we see is that in general, enterococci species of DNA would decrease during the winter months. But when it's decreasing, we would see a big increase in the HF183 samples observed over the winter. So rainy season, increase of that human fecal contamination. And that held true on our creek sites. So that was an indication that maybe, just maybe, there was something to that. The other thing that we noticed was that Deep Creek, which is this lighter blue here, would often have the highest level of that bacteriaceous human marker, so that human contamination. And that is running through a nice cluster of septic systems. But there is a slight problem with that, which I'll get into a little bit later. There is also discharge from wastewater treatment plants upstream of that. So that's something that we'll discuss in a little bit. But We did learn that the HF-183, that human marker, was negatively correlated with water temperature, so colder water temperatures, winter, and it was positively correlated with precipitation and turbidity. So why is this important? If you're looking at the winter rainy season, there is a chance that the groundwater table can become elevated. And at that time, it can pull that septic stream into creeks or into the river, depending on how close it is. Is that definitely what's happening? No, but this is a clue that that could be potentially what we're seeing. So is it septic? So like I said, the water table is elevated, so there's a good chance that it may be. But we also have to keep in mind that the Estacada wastewater treatment plant discharges directly into Clackamas River, and we also have discharges in that Deep Creek area. One comes from the Boring wastewater treatment plant, and one is seasonally from the wastewater treatment plant. So what we don't know is if it is that water table elevated, providing direct line, or if it's that seasonal release from Sandy. We're not sure. So moving forward, we're working with my colleague at Clackamas Community College to determine if there's a possible way to evaluate the influence of the wastewater treatment plants versus septic. So what we're going to do is see if we can develop a method where we look at either sodium bisulfate, sodium metabisulfate, or vitamin C, which are chemicals that are used in the wastewater treatment process. If we can detect these in our samples, we may be able to determine whether or not what we're seeing is actually from wastewater treatment plant or if it's from septic. So that's something that we need to do. So moving forward, we're going to do a second phase of this project. And what we're going to do is just focus on Deep Creek alone, where we know that we can get the stream reaches above those wastewater treatment plants. So for example, above them and at multiple points along Deep Creek at a higher frequency, and try to see if we can pick apart whether we're seeing an actual septic influence, if it is the seasonal release, or if it's some combination of both, because it can always be both. So, in conclusion, I know I went through this really fast, but I'm just trying to keep time in check. So we found that our fecal DNA indicators varied by location and sampling event, but overall, we found that the HF-183, that human marker, that human DNA marker, did not correlate to that to the indicator bacteria, and it was actually inversely correlated to enterococci. So when we would see that human fecal correlation, we would see enterococci go down, which was really interesting. We noticed that it was mostly related to rain events, but we do have more work in order to evaluate that wastewater treatment plant. And so, in short, yes, we are seeing a human fecal contamination in Clackamas River watershed. Absolutely. Is it a result of failing septics? Maybe. But I think that next year I'll be able to sit here right around the same time and tell you with much better certainty.
Okay, so I had a couple of questions.
Yep.
So the septic systems, those are people's personal septic systems that are not on the, like,
Yes.
WES.
Yes.
So, in your opinion, do you know, I mean, I was kind of floored when you told me that Estacada was just dumping their wastewater into the river. I somehow thought that when we had a septic system that we actually paid for, that they are somehow
Wastewater
not
treatment.
doing.
Yeah, Estacada has a wastewater treatment plant up there.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing are all those little spots between that can't connect to a public system yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and wastewater treatment plants discharging into rivers isn't all that uncommon. I mean, it's very common. Ours just happens to be above our stream, but what's interesting is listening to some discussion from people from California. Sometimes that wastewater stream is actually needed to keep the river flows up.
Really?
So
That's interesting.
it's not necessarily the case here, not yet at least, but there are cases where they're seeing decreased wastewater streams and they're getting concerned about their river.
So they're putting the water in and then we're taking the water out and retreating it in.
Yeah, and they
Right.
treat it before it gets in.
Okay.
You know, they should be following all the regulations. It's pretty far up. It should be fairly well diluted by the time it reaches us, because we will have all those streams kind of coming in from the watershed to dilute that down.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a threat. It's just whether or not what we're seeing is an indication that that could be influencing our results. Because when you're looking at DNA versus just looking at bacteria, you're looking at something that's much, much more sensitive. So all I need to get a hit looking at DNA is just one single strand of DNA. That's it. And so if their process doesn't necessarily break down the DNA of this particular organism, then I get one strand and I'll be able to detect it.
So are municipal septic places, company, I don't know how to put it, places like treatment places, like West, are they better for the environment of the water than people's individual septic tanks, or is it kind of a toss-up?
If the wastewater treatment plant is maintained properly, it should be okay. But it's the same thing with the septic. If the septic isn't properly maintained, and it isn't properly sited and properly located, then it can be a major threat.
Okay, thanks.
Do you know what level our wastewater treatment facilities treat the water to? How far do they go in cleaning the water before it is discharged?
They are required to, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but they are required to treat down to regulatory limits for nutrients. So phosphorus, ammonia, nitrates will get gobbled up pretty quickly. And as far as bacteria, they're required to basically just cut it, the bacteria. So.
Well, I mean, you can get a wastewater treatment system that can literally purify the water.
Yes.
Okay. And then obviously lesser amounts of treatment. I was just curious as to what the regulatory requirements were for our wastewater treatment systems, because if they're discharging into the rivers and they're not going that far, wouldn't you expect to find?
Yeah, but my results right now can't put a finger at either one. So, and I'm reluctant to go there until I have more data. I mean, Estacada has been fined before for ammonia, but I'm not just seeing it there. I'm seeing it in Deep Creek, right? So it could be boring or maybe sandy, but I'm not just seeing it there. I've also got human hits in Clear Creek, but Clear Creek doesn't have a treatment plant up there. And so there is a good chance that there are septics coming through there. And also not presented here, we also ran primer sets for ruminants species, so anything that chews cud, like a cow or anything like that. And Clear Creek was one of the areas where we did get a positive hit for that coming in too. So, I mean, there's a very big picture. And so when this site was designed, it was designed just to kind of encompass everything and capture and see what we could see. And now that we know that it works, and now that we feel confident, we're ready to really go out and hone it down and design a much better study.
Is there only 2 discharge permits above our intake, Sandy and Mystic?
Sandy is seasonal,
Right.
and boring wastewater treatment plant. Discharges into
That's
Deep
right,
Creek.
West has a plant there for boring. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's 3.
Yeah.
And so you can go and look what the discharge permit amounts are, even, I mean, you balance, but the problem is without stormwater separation, when
Yeah.
we get heavy rain, then they overfill and then we just don't.
Right. Which could also be another thing that we're seeing during those rain events.
Yeah.
But if we can design a way, to hone down on that, and just by focusing on one creek, we're limiting a lot of variables.
Quick question on your initial sheet that you had up there, the map showing all the colors. At what point does the state step in and say you have to have a system to take care of that material?
So that is a tricky thing. There is legislation that just moved through for a septic loan assistance program, similar to the one that we've set up in Clackamas County. And it's running through the DEQ, but they decided not to have the DEQ administer it because people would be afraid to come and ask for funds because they would be afraid that they're going to be regulated. So if the state knows about it, they can indeed go in and tell you how to fix it. But do many homeowners, want to be brave and take that chance?
Hmm.
No.
Usually they get fixed when they fail.
Yes.
Yeah, that's in my neighborhood. I think I'm probably the only one that, close to me, that pumps every 3 years religiously and then verifies that the drain field is intact. Because I know,
Yeah.
I know 4 houses around me that have never, probably don't even know where the septic tank
And
is.
so part of this septic program is to give people who live in the watershed a rebate for having those septic inspections done. But it hasn't really taken off yet, so they're still working on gaining interest and running workshops and getting that program moving. So I mentioned it's a CCC collaboration, and I just thought that this was really important. So Jim Hermy, he is a program professor, and he runs a program of the water at Clackamas Community College. And he said after this program, the elementary microbiology and aquatic microbiology taught as part of CCC web program had been static for over 30 years, and the material did not reflect the evolution of microbiology and the techniques currently being used. What this allowed him to do was bring in the theory of microbial research tracking and new PCR-related labs, and introduce them to his students in elementary micro, aquatic micro, and environmental chemistry. It's a big deal because moving forward, regulations are going to change and gradually start to advance. So the students at least having some knowledge of the process and how it works is really going to benefit them. They have a number of projects that they're doing, and one of them is they're actually applying the techniques to track sources of fecal pollution at their environmental learning center, and I'm actually going out on Wednesday to help them teach a class and run these samples. So the next thing, luckily this is a short portion, is just to give you an update on our algae monitoring and our toxin analysis and where we're going with that. So why worry about cyanobacteria? Which is another word for algae. Algae is a little more all-encompassing, but in Clackamas watershed, cyanobacteria are an issue. They produce cyanotoxins. You may have heard of what happened in Toledo, Ohio, and they can also produce taste and odor compounds. Every year, late summer, CRW's treatment plant has a taste and odor issue. And so this is one of the reasons why you want to understand them. Cyanotoxins can be harmful to aquatic and terrestrial organisms, but also humans. And the taste and odor compounds, while not toxic, we do get complaints every year from our customers for not wanting to drink the water. So if we can understand the environmental factors that are associated with the occurrence of these things, we might be able to more effectively manage our watershed. We can make better treatment decisions and minimize human ecological risks. So they're kind of important. So a few years ago, we acquired a flow cam. So what it is a combination of a flow cytometer and a cell counter and particle imaging recognition software. It is one of our babies in the water quality lab. And so what you're looking at over here is what we look at when we look at the flow cam. So these are results last year. It says down here we do adaptive sampling as needed. Last year there was a bloom in Clackamas Cove. We ran out, got a sample. While everyone was running around saying, what is it? It could potentially be toxic. What is it? We knew right off the bat, within 3 minutes of getting the machine set up, it was a straight chain Anabina with microcystin, both potential toxin producers. So I actually did get phone calls from customers who were concerned. So we were able to explain to them what it was, what they should do, and why it was not going to affect our drinking water. We also acquired an auto analyzer, which is another one of our babies. We use that for nutrient analysis. So we are linking up what we see in the flow cam to what we see in the water. Everything has heat, algae and cyanobacteria need nutrients. So we're hoping to understand by looking at what we have in the water versus what nutrients are there, maybe we can predict and anticipate a little bit better. So right now we're doing weekly monitoring. We've been doing this for about 2 years. April through October, we have 2 sites in the North Fork and 1 site at CRW's intakes. And then, again, as I said, adaptive sampling as needed. So with all this going on, what we started doing was working with Clackamas Community College again and beginning to develop a method for detecting cyanotoxins. Why is this important? They will most likely, undoubtedly, be on EPA's Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule number 4 coming up in 2018. So they are of emerging concern. Right now, CRW and the CRWP do have a sampling plan for it, but as we'll talk about just a little bit, we can make it better. So what this will allow us to do is to rapidly detect toxins in raw water if a bloom is identified. Right now, when samples are collected, they got to go all the way to Michigan to get tested. There are only a few labs that can do this. And so it'll give us the ability to also test for toxins in the finished drinking water if we deem it necessary. So we'll know quicker. So this year we'll be linking up with Portland General Electric. Due to the parameters on their FERC license, they have been monitoring for algae for years. But one of the things that they did was cut out actually identifying what is in the bloom and just going straight to detecting toxins. So if a bloom is identified, PG would contact the CRWP and get samples for testing. They would get shipped off to Michigan. And if there are any positive level for toxins, Kim Swan would find out from CWP, and the city of Estacada and the city of Lake Oswego would be triggered to collect samples for toxin analysis. So Estacada, because it's furthest upstream, and Lake Oswego, because it's furthest downstream. So those samples are also sent to Michigan. And if those toxins are found in finished water, it would trigger a consultation with OSHA. Because remember, they're not regulated, and there's a lot that's not really known about them, what level is safe, what isn't safe. But the thing is, this is a big lag, a big delay, right? So if you have a toxin in your raw water, up in the watershed, it gets sampled, it gets sent to Michigan, it gets analyzed. A couple of days later, you get your results. Then the drinking water providers are set to sample at their intakes. Then that gets sent to Michigan. The thing with blooms is, you don't know when it's producing toxins. It can change its mind in a second because nobody knows how or why. So we're going to fix this, and that is the point of the CCC collaboration. So now, anytime PG collects a sample, 2 additional samples are going to be collected. One will be collected for us to identify with FlowCam, and one will be used for toxin analysis at the community college. And each time we run a sample out to community college, those samples will be compared to the samples that we get back from Michigan because we're just developing this protocol. So we want to make sure that we're spot on, that we're getting good data, and that we're really developing a good plan. And so what we're also going to do is samples are going to be concurrently collected at CRW's intakes now. Because we have the machine. The CRWP will be funding an intern to work on this project with us, so the intern will be trained, another intern from the community college, on running toxin analysis. So we'll be able to run toxin analysis more frequently and understand if it's actually making it down the river. Now, here's my disclaimer. Last year there was a toxin detect at Lake Oswego's intake, but there was no toxin detect at Estacada. And that left a big question. So how are we getting samples down at Lake Oswego, but not up at Estacada? So what we are unable to answer is if the samples that we're seeing are free-floating toxins that are drifting down and somehow had already passed Estacada. We knew from our flow cam that we never saw a toxin producer float downstream. We monitored that. We knew we had no toxin producing algae moving by. It would have to be a free-floating toxin. And so by learning how to do our own toxin analysis, we'll be able to better understand these questions and determine if it is really moving down the river or if it's a localized problem at Lake Oswego, which it could very well be. And so we're going to be working with them to kind of help pick that apart.
What would it take to be able to do the testing that you currently have to have done in Michigan?
Well, we're actually developing that protocol. So,
As soon as it becomes a rule, there'll be lots of people that are doing it here.
Yeah.
What it is,
Well, I'm just thinking about getting ahead of the curve
Yeah,
on
no, I
that.
agree.
so at the community college, Jim Jeremy applied for a grant and he received it. So he was able to purchase the same machine. I forgot to point it out. This is a high performance liquid chromatography
That's the machine.
That's the machine. We were able to purchase the same exact machine that they have at Michigan, and we will be working off of the same exact protocols. What we want to make sure is, as this program develops, that we are accurate. And so that's why we're starting now, and that's why we're comparing to the results that we get it. But what's neat about this is, in the end, the Clackamas River watershed is going to have the most robust algae monitoring and identification and toxin analysis program in the state of Oregon. So we will have a real pulse on the river and on the watershed. We'll know what's moving, and we'll be one step ahead of the curve of regulations. So we'll understand what's going on in our river a lot better.
Would that give us a voice in developing those regulations?
It's going to be hard because it's coming down from the EPA. I already have some potential issues with how the UCMR3 monitoring is going to take place. Right now, it looks like it's going to be quarterly monitoring for toxins, which on one hand, I understand why they're doing it. It's easier for water fires to understand. Nobody's going to mess it up. On the other hand, toxin production is so spotty. You could sample and then 2 weeks later have a bloom. So I'm waiting to see how they hash that out, because I'm sure somebody is going to have a concern about that. But as for having us at the table, probably not, but it gets us to see the table with OHA. And so they are very excited about us developing this program, and they're keeping an eye on it.
So can the OHA do this testing at the lab in Beaverton? Or?
No.
Oh, I could have done that. I had that, I do yes.
So I have a question. If we find these poison in these toxic algae in the water, do we have the ability then to clean the water?
So what we can do now is add activated carbon. If it tends to be a consistent thing that we find in our intake, I will sit in front of you and ask you to install some ozone, because it does an excellent job of taking care of toxins. Okay, so just to acknowledge my interns once again, Hope, Rachel, Austin, and Oksana, Conrad, and so if there aren't any more questions.
I have another question. In terms of, we were very concerned about conservation over last summer, and I know that we had a lot of rains and we got past that. So do you know where we are right now with the amount of?
I just had this conversation today.
Oh.
So I was hopeful with all that snow, but the river levels are dropping quickly.
Okay.
The snow is melting quickly. So my opinion is that we will likely limp by this summer. I've already started talking with Kevin and Christine, the other conservationists in the watershed. We are meeting over the next 2 weeks to start getting our messaging in order again and preparing for that. But it's my opinion that this is going to happen more frequently, and so we will need to really prepare ourselves for the future. Because
The media isn't helping us. They aren't. They've led everybody to believe that there's no problem, we have more snow than we know what to do with, and the river's gonna be just fine.
And it's just
I'm
gotten very
talking about how
warm.
fast it's melting.
I know, but nobody listens to that. They aren't reporting on that.
it won't be as bad as last year.
No.
I think I'm going to say this as if my words could be in italics. I think it will be okay, but I can't guarantee that we're going to be great. So we're going to be watching it. We always track it. And if they start dropping, we will move forward with whatever conservation plans that we need. There are some programs that we are working on developing in conservation. I was only supposed to talk for 20 minutes and I'm at 35. So I cut that out of the presentation, but if you guys want to have a workshop or something, I can go over all that stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is the board's heard me talk a little bit about the 4 pillars of providing safe drinking water, and one of those important pillars is knowing your source. And so I think we're very fortunate here to have not only the expertise of Dr. DiLorenzo and the different folks that all, not only her, but all the folks that have been working collectively on trying to address this issue, and then also get ahead of it. I mean, what you heard this evening is pretty groundbreaking as it relates to some of the research that's being done here to help make sure that we can provide our customers with safe drinking water. And it also helps us kind of inform how we proceed with the next pillar, which is that of treatment. And so this is all very useful data that will be even more valuable as we continue to talk about how we can improve our system. So, thank you, Suzanne.
I think that in addition to that, we need to take advantage of the tutorial, to kind of update us on what we can do and how we can do it to compensate the district for these problems that are coming in. They aren't going to end. Okay. The next is the Butterfield line transmission. And it was originally stricken from our,
Yeah, but then it was added back.
but it's been added back, so.
Yeah, we apologize for that. That we had it in, it was in the original packet that went out, and then we took it out because we thought we had difficulty making contact with the Woods family. They came through late in the game, got it. Because of the importance of this particular project, we appreciate the fact that you've allowed us to put it back on the agenda, and Adam's here to kind of do the presentation.
Yes, with motion on the floor to approve the program with the Butterfield project.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move that the board accept the purchase of a water line easement on TL 200 map 2S 2E25CC, not to exceed $10,000 as described in Exhibit A, and authorize the general manager to sign the easement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I provided, as typical, the write-up, and then there was also, as Mr. Moore described, there was an explanatory memo for the board's request explaining why the item was initially struck and then reinstated. As of Monday, we made contact with kind of a final confirming contact with the property owner who lives out of state and their attorney, and they agreed to the negotiated value that's written into the agenda item. So again, appreciate the opportunity to present this, get this easement wrapped up so we can proceed with the Butterfield project. This particular easement, and I didn't furnish any drawings other than what's in the exhibit, but if you look at exhibit B in your packet, there's the sketch on it. This guy here. Three pages. I'll just scroll all the way back to the last page of the packet.
Now you don't.
And again, I apologize for not pulling it up on screen, but what it really is the easement is adjacent to the existing easement that we already have with the Wood property that was acquired back in 1980, and the Redland Reservoir site. So what this easement will provide us with is an optimal route for the designed alignment of the water main into the reservoir site, which not only accommodates our alignment for the water line project, but also future Redland Reservoir, Redland Reservoir number 3, which will be constructing into the backbone project as well. So that's the purpose of the easement. There's also a strip of land to the south of our site that we negotiated a temporary construction easement with the property owner. So that's all inclusive in this easement request. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, the motion has been proposed and seconded. I hear a vote on this. All those in favor say aye.
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 Noes? No noes, it passes. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
And item 2 was skipped, postponed actually. So we'll go to item number 3, approval of the CRWSC budget. We've had the occasion to look at it in past meetings. And so I'd like to hear a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the CRWS CBN 2016-20183 budget as presented.
Second.
Second.
Motion has been second. Any commentary on this?
Just simply note that we'll be having discussions with Sunrise Water Authority as a result of changes in service levels for things such as human resources, contract management, that sort of thing, which will allow, if there are any subsequent changes, we can do a supplemental change in the budget in the future.
Okay. Here a vote on the subject?
We
Those
do
in
have
favor?
a staff presentation if you
Oh,
like.
excuse me.
Fire.
I thought you were going to do the next set.
Well, and I can go through this pretty quickly because we did talk about this at the last board meeting. Just a little update, the Sunrise Water Authority Board met in April and did approve the budget as presented. CRWSC that board had approved the budget with the budget committee. And so this is kind of the last step before adoption of the budget by the commission. And I don't think I really changed a lot of this process. As I said, it was approved April 27th by Sunrise, and these approvals and this mechanism that we do, this is written into the ORS 190 of once the budget committee has approved it, each individual board approves it, then it can be adopted.
Any questions?
Do we have any assurance that we're going to go ahead with our working agreements between the two agencies instead of them pulling out, the Sunrise Water Authority pulling out of the agreements? It seems like they're getting their own engineers, now they want to get their own budget people, and that's what 190 is supposed to prevent.
Right, and we have, there are certain things that will continue on. Certainly, part of the issue that Sunrise is dealing with is some pretty extensive growth in their area, and that's one of the primary reasons that they brought in some additional engineering staff, because they're looking at 400 to 600 new services a year, which is going to keep a lot of people really busy. CRW currently does payroll for Sunrise. I'm still providing services over there, but they are looking to hire another either senior accountant or finance director type person over there. And when that person is up to speed, then they may not need my activities as much. We've got plenty of stuff to keep me busy over here as well with the Backbone project, but so there are some areas that have kind of slowed down. I think in the contracting and the procurement, a lot of that was setting up like blanket POs, so the ongoing activity has not been as much as was originally anticipated. And I think that'll be part of the joint meeting with both boards, is to kind of discuss that and
Right, so I think there's a positive step is their approval of this budget at their last board meeting, so that's a good indication of going forward. And then the idea of trying to have a joint meeting so that we can kind of clarify the direction moving forward. So I'm looking at that as a positive step. And then their general manager, myself, have had 2 meetings so far and are meeting on a weekly basis to discuss how we move forward from here. So,
Well, I guess until we get things ironed out, that'll be a full in the budget.
We have a meeting scheduled, a joint meeting of both boards on the 13th of June.
What day?
June 13th.
Yeah, it says
It was handed
possible.
out prior to the meeting.
It says possible, so is
yeah,
this, is
I
that
just want to
mean-
clarify, that's a tentative date that we've tossed around, but we want to at least get something on your calendar. That seemed to be a lot of the time, but we And we need to continue to work with Sunrise to confirm if that's a date that will work.
Or maybe willing to accept the budget after we have that meeting and get what their problems are and get an idea of when and if we're going to merge the two districts down the line sometime.
The budget does come with the ability to alter it as time goes on, so we can, if we find that there's some differences that we feel should be changed, we can do that at a later date, whether we, including our approval.
Carol was going to say something.
Yeah, I think the question, though, is can we table this for tonight, or does it need to get approved tonight in order to meet deadlines?
The budget calendar that was approved by the commission anticipates adopting the budget on June 13th. And the way the structure of the 190 is both individual boards need to vote on and approve it. And that being said, the commission itself on the 13th can discuss any modifications,
Okay.
but certainly going forward, it is a biennial budget, so there's really plenty of time to do any kind of supplemental budget should things significantly change.
That was a critical component from my perspective also.
Yeah.
That we would be able to do a supplemental budget after the discussion with Sunrise. So
And
as long as that's in place, I think we're okay.
And this budget does, because of the way we appropriate dollars, it does afford us a lot of flexibility. So it's not a really rigid that we have to do exactly this. We do have some flexibility in how we can implement the shared services in the process through the biennium.
Okay, there's any other comments? Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Ayes, yes to accept. Any votes?
Okay, we can vote now?
Yes.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Aye. One no. Okay. Consent agenda, I think, didn't we approve that earlier?
No.
No, we didn't.
No,
Okay.
I've been consent agenda.
No, Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Second.
Motion presented and seconded. Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. It's passed. Now, the next item is the new capital improvement project for 2015-2017. And there's a presentation by Joyce Hugh.
I don't have any slides.
Okay.
Sorry. This is an informational update on an ongoing project that we've been working on for a few months. It's currently been designed. We have the ODOT permit in hand, and we have a task order to the on-call contractor out for signature as we speak. As soon as we get that task order signed by both parties, we'll schedule a pre-construction meeting and proceed with construction. We expect to be done by June. It's a smaller project to take care of some known leaks within the highway, and we limited the scope of the project to not extend all the way to the Oregon City boundary because we don't have that IGA agreement in hand yet, so we don't want to build things that were going to be free to somebody else. And with that,
This is that Henrysian 213, isn't it?
correct.
Yeah. High pressure gas, big one.
We start right about on top of it.
I know. I saw the one.
Yeah. We have been in contact.
Be careful.
With Williams Gas, they're aware of the project. They'll be invited to the pre-construction meeting and probably on hand while we're digging in that area.
believe it's
The
state
gas
required.
is
It's an ORS.
within a casing across the highway, so, and it goes under the existing water line, a little deeper than the existing water line, so we're pretty confident we'll not have any conflict.
Very good.
So just to be clear, this is just an informational item only,
Right.
but we want to make sure the board was aware, especially given the dollar value aware of what we're doing and how we're approaching this, and the importance of moving forward.
It's also not identified in the CIP list for the biennium, so we wanted to make sure that we were aware that we were fitting this into the budget as we have it for the biennium. We'll be using savings from other projects accumulated or scale back some scope in order to fit this in. It's not a large project, so we'll be able to do that.
How many days will you be in the hunt?
He thinks we'll have a shutdown for 3 days. We're limited to a 9 to 3 workday. We don't have to work at night, but we are limited to a small day. I would anticipate some other closures for pressure testing, saw cutting, service work that would not be lane closures, but just using the bike lane. We'll know more when we see a schedule at the pre-construction meeting.
What people can we expect to be without water during that time?
No one will be out of water. There are 2 services connection for this project. They'll be out of water for the period of time it takes to switch from the new service line to the old, to the meter location. Hour, 2 hours,
And that'll be coordinated with them.
definitely, they'll be notified.
Is there going to be signage so that people could take alternative routes?
And where would they go?
I mean, they'd go around Beaver Creek.
And where would they go?
Around Beaver Creek.
They'll go.
Or Layla.
We're not closing, we're closing the lane, but we're using the left turn lane as an alternate lane. So we aren't changing the traffic pattern. There will be a change. We're going to exclude the left turn onto Henry C during the work hours. So we'll be occupying that left turn lane, and we don't want people to block traffic waiting to turn onto Henry C. The right turn off of Henry C will be okay, and the right turn onto Henry C will be okay.
So you'll let them know before they get to Glen Oak that they have to make the left at Glen Oak? Is that part of your traffic control plan?
I put together a preliminary traffic control plan to get the permit, which is rudimentary at best.
Well, we need to be on trip check every day that we can have that highway closed, so that everybody gets it on their PDA and on their thing. Have you been there at 9 o'clock in the morning and seen how much traffic back up there? Okay, so.
He lives in our,
And
he
my
lives in
neighbor's
our
looking
regular
at
list.
it, I'm gonna get the phone calls, I'm serious.
Okay.
So, get the signage out, both sides of that thing, so they know that if they have to turn left, that they have to turn left at Glen Oak before they get to Henry Street.
I don't think there's any accommodation for an advanced reader board put up weeks in advance of the project. It's
No, I mean
not
just-
that big of a project.
Okay, well,
We're-
I guess the best way to phrase it, whatever warning you can give people would be probably appreciated, because none of us like to get those kind of phone calls if we don't have to.
I understand.
I understand.
VMS signs are pretty cheap, so.
But I would like to point out one thing, is I had a concern about the cost at one point, because our contractual relationship with our general manager is $50,000 contractual amount for the general manager's signature. However, about a year or so ago, we actually changed the policy with respect to CIP projects to $75,000. So, and it, as you see, did come underneath that. That's just a reminder to the board that when it's a CIP project, the limit is $75,000, not $50,000.
Yeah. Very good.
I have a question for the board. Has everybody met Joe Esky?
No,
I've seen him here
He
before.
starts talking, and I just,
I have.
it wasn't apparent to me that everybody had met him. Joe is our on-staff engineer. He's helping us with our CIP project because Adam has shifted over to the backbone project, And as we had strategized around this, we needed to make sure that we kept both our CIP and our backbone project moving. I'm very pleased to have him here, but I didn't want to be rude, and I apologize for not having introduced him earlier.
I was introduced a few months ago, shortly after I was brought on board. I haven't made a presentation to you independently before, so it's my first opportunity to talk to you.
Well, if it hasn't been said before, welcome aboard.
Did you have a question, Commissioner?
I suggest that staff send us a memo telling us where the water is gonna be rerouted, so when people see all this construction in the roadway, that they know that water is gonna get to their house, how it's gonna get there.
We'll get you a talkie reader.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I did have one question. When were you planning on starting? Do you have a date approximate?
Best guess, 2 weeks.
Is there any way to push this off until after school's out? I'm serious, I'm dead serious about
I didn't hear you,
that is a-
I didn't hear you, Commissioner. What you
that. Is there any way we can push this out till school's over? That is the main bus route
That's the
for all the schools that come back for us for the high school
first week
students.
of June.
Was that?
Is that
June
first-
10th is the last day.
June 10th?
June 10th is the last day for Ransom.
Okay.
I mean, VMS signs to let people know what's going on, you just pull them up there and program the thing and boom, it's up and running. And taking the buses out of the equation is a huge deal. And I don't really know, but they just closed the fire station up there, so now response times for everybody are extended, and if they have to deal with that too, they're gonna really be extended. So, there's just lots of issues up there.
Whatever you can do.
Yeah, so they're working out of 15s and 10s, while 16s is closed, so.
Any other questions? Okay, the next item is the third quarter financial update.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to keep everybody posted where we are. We are in the first year of our biennial budget, and we have had all the activity recorded through the third quarter of that first year. So we're 37.5% of the way through the budget, although with the biennial budget, it's not necessarily a 50-50 deal. But I looked at kind of what we had budgeted each year, and we're pretty close. We do have, the capital outlay is a little more heavily weighted to the first year. Everything else is pretty close to a 50-50 break. And we are planning on having a work session with the board on May 23rd. That will include our budget committee members. So that will be an opportunity with the work session to talk about this in a lot more detail. Tonight, my plan is just to give kind of a really high-level discussion. At the work session, we'll kind of talk about anything that has come up that maybe wasn't anticipated and how we're going to deal with that or accommodate that within our budget process.
So when will you do that?
That's May 23rd.
23rd.
The,
May 23rd.
yeah, May 23rd, the regular work session.
Okay, thanks.
So we'll start off with a little discussion about the revenue. We are currently at 42.3%, so that's a little bit above that 37.5%, but as all of you know, we don't sell water exactly the same amount every single billing cycle. We do have our higher use months in the summer. But we are ahead of the budget, and when you add in wholesale water, my projection is that we will come in at the end of the year almost $1 million ahead of the budget projections. That seems like an awful lot of money. It's good to have more revenue, But part of that is, if you recall, when we were putting this budget together last year, we already knew that we had almost no snowpack. And we included in our biennial budget a 10% reduction during those high-use summers times in case we had to do curtailment. So we didn't want to budget expenditures planning on a certain amount of revenue that may not be realized. So we do have a very conservative revenue side of our budget.
And even with that, you're a million ahead.
And then on the expenditures, again, very high level, I'm just showing the appropriation categories within the general fund. So if you calculate that 37.5% of the total budget number, and these numbers are presented in thousands, we could have spent $3,077,000 in personnel services, and we're at $2.8 million. And we could have spent 2.9 in materials and services, we're at 2.7. And then on our capital outlay, we're pretty close to where we would have expected, although that is taking 37.5% of the biennial budget instead of realizing that our budget was weighted more to the first year. So we are under budget in all categories, in the appropriation categories on the expenditure side, so that's good. We do have some things that we're aware of that are coming up that we'll be discussing at the work session, and then have further discussions with the board as we move forward. The biennial budget, it's the first one we've done. We anticipate doing a supplemental budget. A couple of other things that I can share is we've already collected about 250% of our biennial estimate for SDCs. So more new services coming on board than we anticipated. Again, we do very conservative estimates for SDCs and new services. But with those SDC dollars come additional expenditures. So if you look at some of the line items, our inventory number is a little bit higher than we would have expected, but we're using that inventory to install meters for our new customers. And again, we'll go into a lot more detail at the work session in a couple of weeks. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
You answered the only two I would ever have. Is the revenue up and are the expenditures down? So, and they were yes, so not bad.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Any questions? Very good. Well, thank you, Carol. Okay. Now we have a report from our brand new general manager. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. First off, I want to start my update by kind of talking a little bit about the orientation that's been taking place for my first month. And first off, I just want to thank not only the board for your time and talking with me, but also the staff who've been really welcoming and have taken time to help bring me up to speed on a variety of things. And then Mr. Moore has been an invaluable resource as we work through the transition and has been a wealth of knowledge and providing some insight and guidance and background that I think is hopefully going to help me be more successful in serving as your general manager. So obviously a lot of my time has been focused more internally on trying to familiarize myself with the district staff, some of the policies and procedures. But I look forward to kind of working on some of the external efforts as well, which I have had a chance to start on. One thing I'd point out in the general manager's report is we did have an opportunity to meet with Clackamas Fire District number 1, the fire chief there, and it was a very valuable meeting just to kind of talk a little bit about our relationship and also create an awareness as it relates to the backbone project, and especially since we talk a lot about the fire flow component associated with the backbone project. And so obviously that was something that he was very excited to hear about. And then through that discussion, there was that recognition that it would be valuable to kind of have greater interaction between CRW and the fire district. And so one of the things that he suggested that he's used with other organizations is that we create what he called kind of an interagency committee that would have 2 elected officials, fire chief and general manager, that we meet on some frequency. It could be 3 months or once every 6 months, just to kind of update each other on areas of mutual interest, projects that we may be working on, and just kind of help with that coordination. And so one of the things I wanted to ask the board this evening is, 1, if there's interest in having this, and 2, if there is, if there's a couple volunteers who would be willing to participate in that process.
I'd volunteer, but I think it's more than just sharing information. I think, having been on fire board, having been on this board, I think there's partnerships there that can be had. And anything that can make what they do fit with what we do, because we don't have a lot of eyes in the field. Their people are looking at our hydrants and they're, seeing what's going on, and, they use our infrastructure probably in a heavier way than we do, and maybe we can get the feedback from them about issues that they see, because do we pedo any of our hydrants regularly? Do we do pedo tests, Don? Do we pedo any of the hydrants? No, I didn't think so. Because the fire department always did. Do you guys, does engineering pedo any of the hydrants out there?
We've got our hydraulic model down to a point. On the north side, we're probably within 3 to 5% of accuracy.
Oh, really? Cool.
And we require new customers that are coming on. They do their own fire flows with our assistance.
Oh, do they?
They write the formal report. We use the data then as backup to our model. South side isn't quite as accurate. It's probably within 10%.
Okay.
And because we haven't had as many opportunities to run flow tests in the south.
Well, maybe they can help us with that, because as someone that has run pump for hundreds of hours, we used to have a chart on the pump panel so we knew where we were, and we would know, because Claremont would tell us, when you hit here, you better call us, and if you hit there very long, you really better call us. And so, I don't know whether we still have that list or not, but we were very good about calling them when we knew we were going to be drawing a lot of water or pumping very hard, because we didn't want to damage their system. And nothing's really changed since then, so it'll change a lot after the backbone project, immensely. So there's just things that come out of that.
Sounds like you have a volunteer there. How many people did you want?
So, yeah, the suggestion was two commissioners, and then I would serve that capacity.
Come on, Jerry, jump in.
Go ahead.
You jump in there, Larry.
Maybe Larry.
Come on, buddy.
Well, I was kind of waiting for Naomi to speak because her husband, Dave McTeague, is been on the water board,
Fire board.
fire board for
Doesn't
years.
It doesn't mean I know anything, just.
If she procrastinates, I guess I could do it.
I'll take you up.
I think you just made a deal there.
Very good, thank you.
All right, with that direction, we'll proceed forward with coordinating, and I appreciate Commissioner Sorrell and Commissioner McNeil volunteering for that assignment.
May I make a recommendation? I think here also, because it is an assignment of the board probably needs to authorize the stipend as an approved meeting.
Yes.
Do we need to put that on the agenda for an actual action item?
You can do that here, just as by, when a voice vote can do that.
Okay.
So moved.
Second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Pass.
Sound like a rose,
All right,
For your work.
to continue on with the general manager's report, on the next page, talk a little bit about already the Clackamas Regional Water Supply Commission that you've heard quite a bit about that this evening. I think the thing to note is, again, the tentative June 13th date I wanted to try to bring out as it relates to a possible joint meeting with Sunrise. So we'll continue to work on that. There is a CRW SC budget or board meeting that evening, so that is going to happen regardless. But the question is whether we tack on a joint meeting after that. The other thing I want to note is, as far as kind of that external outreach, I did have a chance to participate with a number of other CRW staff in a presentation to Oregon City staff that was very well attended. And included the city manager, the CFO, planning director, director of engineering, public works director, to talk about the backbone project and to answer some questions. As a result of that meeting, we have received some correspondence from Oregon City that we're in the process of trying to gather some information and respond to. And then we have a number of other things that we're working on. The intent at this point is to come back to the board during a work session to kind of update you on all the different activities as it relates to Oregon City. So we'll get back to you once we have a better idea of the timing with that respect. The other thing I would note is also had a chance to participate in the Oregon Water Utilities Council, which is an organization that CRW is a utility member of. One of the reasons I wanted to highlight it is Suzanne DiLorenzo noted, kind of the value of looking at some of the different treatment technologies. She specifically talked about the use of ozone and ozonation, and that's a project that this group has been taking on to try to devise a process or updates the Oregon rules as it relates to how the ozonation process works for water utilities. I would also point out that Suzanne DiLorenzo is also going to be serving as the chair of that organization starting actually now. And so I think that's a real feather in her cap, but then also an indication of the value that we derive from that organization and some of the work that they do. Also in your packets, there's a number of communication items I just want you to be aware of. Things like the April bill inserts that went to all of our customers, or water quality or consumer confidence reports that also been distributed. And then there was a press release conducted for announcing my arrival here as your general manager, and we've also notified our customers as it relates to backflow notices as well. One of the things mentioned in our newsletter was the opportunity to kind of enhance our customer service to our customers and provide them the paperless billing option. And so Carol and her staff has had an opportunity to work to enhance, again, our ability to provide that. This is one of those things that so far we've had a pretty good reaction to as far as people signing up for that, and we only anticipate that to continue to grow. And eventually it becomes a nice cost-saving measure to us. Plus, it provides some enhanced features to our customers as well. And then last, just want to thank you for your participation in a number of the backbone community meetings that we held, the 3. I also want to thank the staff. We had a fantastic participation from staff and being available to answer questions. Appreciate Adam and Bob's work in putting together the presentation as we went through. I think we didn't have huge numbers, but I thought we had very respectable numbers, and I really appreciated the questions that the members of the community had. And I think as you experienced, a lot of people were just curious. They wanted information, and how are we going to continue to communicate with them. So that's something that we'll continue to incorporate as part of our outreach efforts throughout the backbone project process. With that concludes my general manager's report.
Very good, thank you.
Question.
Any questions?
Yes.
Anybody? Oh, excuse me.
In your report, you said meetings on the backbone project were lightly attended. How many people did you get?
I think total 20,
Just over 20, 25 for the three.
Happy
Between the
Valley,
three.
yeah, Happy Valley and Beaver Creek have the most.
The most of
Yeah,
that,
we have the most at Happy Valley and at Beaver Creek.
how many was that?
I think there were 8 at each meeting.
Yeah, I think 8 or 9, yeah, something like that.
and that's typical for a meeting where you're just kind of introducing or rolling out. Obviously, as we move forward, where we're preparing for construction and better delineate impacts to customers, then we have tends to get more interest.
We're gonna expect more when the machinery hits the ground.
Well, just want to thank staff for all their work they did, but also be note that there's a lot of people out there that don't know what we're talking about. It couldn't come to the meetings if it didn't positively come to
As the
them.
saying
Get
goes,
a lot of questions about it.
as the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments from the board at all? If not, then this meeting.
There's one more public comment. I remember when I left it out when I was doing the meeting. But we get it, the public a second chance.
Oh, right. Yeah, but on here it said no comments, but whatever.
I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, sure, come on up.
I made that mistake.
It has to do with Bell Avenue. Adam talked about the contractor that's working in hell. You know, if you guys signed the agreement with him, or they potentially want to get it. But it's the worst construction site I've ever seen. I mean, the sewer was a good job, and the water district did a good job last year, but they tore a mile of Bell Avenue up, and they got cones all the way along. I'm surprised there haven't been a lot of accidents. They haven't tapered the edges of the road, so if somebody got too close, they didn't go off and wreck and airbags, everything. I've seen the water district down there this week working. I don't know, was that a malfunction or just an adjustment in the water line contract?
This was on.
On Bell Avenue, it's that new
Yeah.
sidewalk project, is the water district, just
Okay.
got 8,000 on
I think one
it.
of your engineers is gonna answer.
Yeah, I could respond to that if you'd like.
Sure.
The Bell project that's going on right now is the county's road work.
Could you come up to the microphone?
Yeah. I'll just stand. The Bell project that's going on now is actually the county's portion of the Bell work. We did our water line work back last fall, well,
Yeah.
summer and fall, in anticipation of the county's work. So any work that you might have seen that CRW was involved in, there was a couple service relocations and some valve work that we had done, repair work we had done a month ago or so.
Well, I saw them out in Oberlin, the last few days was a big backhoe and a big retaining.
Correct, there's a small leak out in that area that we're getting fixed.
Okay. Yeah, I recommend one of you guys drive down there and see how ugly the construction site it actually is. I mean, there's a lot of good ones out there, but this is pretty bad. I'm surprised there hasn't been any major accidents. As you can see, they got equipment parked at all intersections, and so you gotta pull out, stick your nose out in traffic, and hope somebody don't get you. So, I mean,
Oh, they got to go
caution to use
down.
that company.
655-8321.
What's that?
Yeah.
It's the road department.
It's a county.
It's county.
It's
Oh, I
a
know.
county project.
But Adam had talked about using that contractor possibly, that the county started using. Is that the one that's doing it now?
You're actually correct, yeah, the Tapani is the contractor working on the Bell project, and they are the contractor we'll be using.
Now we see the connection.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
I didn't get
But,
that.
and it's a different project, so.
Well, it's a different project, but it's an ugly construction site and
So you're, okay.
it's hazard, so I just put CRW on notice, and we wanna, go further into reference and see what kind of work they actually do by going to their site. Somebody's probably gonna get hurt before it's done, I mean, wreck-wise.
Yeah, I already gave that a hard time about that.
Thank you.
I think he knows.
Any other input? If not, this meeting is adjourned.